This is Conspirinormal.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to Conspirinormal. And Surfiel is here, back with me this week. Welcome back, Surfiel.
Thank you. Yes,
Surfiel had to take a little break, like we all do at sometimes. But this week, we've got one of our favorite people. Been on the show quite a few times over the last few years, and was a part of Strange Realities last year and a part of Strange Realities in 2020, and will be again. And coming up here on March 25th, we will be doing our next presentation series with this person, Mr. David Metcalfe. And we will be talking about star children and psychic futures. And
that's right.
David, when you told me the title, I was like, that's perfect. And you guys can see that awesome graphic done by our buddy Phil that got the font approval from Mr. Metcalfe here just the other day.
Yeah, I love the font. It screams star children and psychic futures. It's perfect.
yes. The Star Child font.
Yes, it does. So that was completely totally inadvertent, but
no, it wasn't. It was a cosmic synchronicity.
It was a cosmic synchronicity. Yes,
he was guided.
Yes, and so we'll be talking a little bit more about that a little later. Talking about what David is going to be talking about on the 25th, and we're really excited to have him, and we'll talk about how you guys can tune in to see that. But welcome back to Conspirinormal, David.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it. It's always fun to talk with you guys and explore the world around us, the world of weird.
Yeah, man, it is a weird world indeed. And we understand that you just got back a couple of days ago from an interesting conference called Archives of the Impossible. And I thought we just start off tonight talking about that, because apparently this was quite one of those like life-changing conferences for you.
Yeah, prior to going, I was calling it the Met Gala of the Weird. It was set up by Dr. Jeffrey Kripal at Rice University to celebrate the opening of their Archives of the Impossible, which it's been kind of building. They actually tried to hold it a couple of years ago, but then COVID happened. They wanted to hold an opening conference, but the Archives of the Impossible hold Jacques Vallée's papers, the original letters that Whitley Strieber received after writing Communion. So they're called the Communion Letters. There's a book that Ann and Whitley Strieber put together that kind of contains some of them, but this is the full set of letters that he had, and I think there's some other stuff in there as well. They've got Richard Haynes holdings. Richard Haynes formed NARCAP, which was a group that was looking at pilot encounters with UFOs and kind of recording those and liaisoning with the FAA. So they have his papers. They have some of the original Stargate remote viewing programs documentation from Ed May, who was the Stargate director for a long time, long space of the program. They have some of Stanley Krippner's papers. Stanley Krippner ran the Maimonides Dream Lab experiments up in New York, and he's been a long time figure in the field of consciousness studies and parapsychology and transpersonal psychology. Doing a lot of research with different traditional practitioners in that, and kind of like a mix of psychology and anthropology and ethnography. They have Larry Bryant's collection there, which is Larry Bryant was a longtime kind of UFO guy that had a large collection of documentation from conferences and MUFON and that. He may have even been a MUFON director. I'm not really familiar with Bryant too much. They have Stuart Alexander's, who is a physical medium. They have his collection there, which was donated by Leslie Kane. They have Brenda Densler, who wrote Lure of the Edge about sort of scholars and scientists encountering the UFO topic. She'd given her archives to Diana Pasulka, who then donated them to Rice. So it's just this huge collection of, and I may even be missing some of the stuff they have there, but not going to just continue listing things they have, so it's a huge collection that they have. So this conference was the opening, the official kind of like celebration of this collection. And it was an opportunity to bring, a lot of the people who had donated together along with other people in the field to sort of discuss, where we're going from here, under kind of the auspices of the work that Jeff Kripal's been doing for a couple decades now, in terms of, sort of trying to re-examine, ask better questions, and get more serious attention to kind of the topics that we all love. And it was just a really, really great event. Jeff is a fantastic curator of people. So he did an amazing job. He and his team of grad students and everyone else who worked on this did just a great job of bringing together an awesome group of people to kind of meet and discuss things. And, he kind of wanted it to be a looser format conference. So there were plenary talks, which were presented papers, and there were panels. But the main focus was basically on people just getting to know each other and interacting and having a chance, to kind of connect after COVID. And so, some people like Eric Wargo was there. Love hanging out with Eric any chance I can get. So, it was great just to kind of walk around with the Sherlock Holmes of retrocausality, enjoy some time with him. Mike Cleland was there.
Was he? Oh, wow.
Yeah, he didn't present, but he was he was there. The first time that I've met him and really had a chance to chat with him, not too extensively, but meet with him and talk. Whitley Strieber was there. He gave a plenary talk. And it was just a chance because of the COVID restrictions that are still in place at Rice. It was a smaller group. It wasn't probably as large as it could have been, but I think they said that they had close to like 1,500 signups for the Zoom.
Wow.
Which, working at a university, I know that they were both elated by that and completely terrified of the possibilities for that going terribly wrong, but it was an awesome weekend. I actually just did a live broadcast earlier today with Jay King and Sean from Witness Citizen. Jay King is the co-founder of the Experiencer Group, which was set up by him and Stuart Davis and a couple of other people. Stuart Davis is an artist and musician that he's had a lot of mantid encounters that he talks about. And Jay King is a co-founder, and he's an experiencer as well. But they've set up this kind of network group for people who have experiences to kind of get together and talk and that. And he was there with, he said, I think 15 people or so from the group came. And Jay was actually on a panel with me, which is the first time that we've met and talked. And even, I haven't really even talked to him online or anything, but it's just awesome. Like to be able to just, meet new people, talk to people. I got a chance to meet Paul Smith for the first time in person. We've chatted a bit online. He's in one of the Army remote viewers that was trained under Ingo Swann. And I think that might've been, I don't know if that was with the program or later that he met Ingo, but he had a long time relationship with Ingo Swann, learning from him and that. So it was just really great. I got to have, breakfast with Ed May, the Stargate project manager, and just talk about the current state of parapsychology and stuff. Hang out with Greg Bishop. Like we actually ended up rooming together to save Rice some money. So, just hanging out with Greg for a weekend is always great. So yeah, it was just really powerful. And on the end of these kind of topics and that, it was refreshing after so much digital and some of the tensions and that kind of stuff that can come out of, sort of flame wars and people, sniping at each other online. It was awesome to be in such a mixed group of people, not all of whom agree with each other at all, but in a very mature sort of collegiate setting, from folks like experiencers that were just in this experiencer group coming, and being able to sit there with someone like Jacques Vallée, or they had dinner with Whitley a couple times. So if you can imagine being an experiencer, come into this conference and having the opportunity to sit with Whitley, who, has kind of opened up that topic in 1987 with communion, and to be able to just not even necessarily talk about weird stuff, but just to have, enjoy a meal with him, you know what I mean? So it was just really powerful. And that credit goes to Jeff and the grad students that, helped put this on, and Rice, honestly, for being bold enough to host this thing.
No, Kreipel he's a professor at Rice.
Yeah, he's an assistant dean in their School of Humanities. And obviously he's written Mutants and Mystics, Authors of the Impossible, The Flip, a bunch of books on that, Supernatural with Whitley, covering this topic and really trying to broaden and deepen the conversation around these things and provide resources. That was something that I realized today when I was talking about this earlier. Recapping kind of with Jay about our experience, was that there's so many resources in the university system that get put to, stuff that isn't necessarily culturally viable. You get the sort of the academics are at it again feeling of, another study on something, or, we just learned that if you use Kleenex when you sneeze, it catches the mucus, and it's they spend so much money on that kind of stuff, and it gets published, and it's sort of academic trends get funded, and people publish on this stuff, and it's just churning, not totally, but a certain amount of it is just churning out stuff that doesn't matter,
or just totally self-referential.
Yeah, just self-referential, has nothing to do with anything. And so, this conference was an opportunity to take some of those resources and turn it to this issue with, a lot of people may be skeptical and think that these things sit on the sidelines, but this is integral to what it means to be human, precognition and all of these things, which, we all have especially us and the people that listen to this show, synchronicity is a thing,
Right. Absolutely.
And so this is, this isn't some anomalous thing. This is something that everybody lives with, deals with, asks what it is, what does it mean, that kind of stuff. And this is an opportunity to bring people together thinking, and not just scholars, right? Not just academics, but regular people, in the experiencer group, professionals, scientists, humanities scholars, the not artists, and bring all of those people together and start to have those conversations, which is just, I've been to a Parapsychological Association conference. I've been to UFO conferences. I've been to, different things, and they all have a different flavor. But this one, being in person, and it may have just be also the post-COVID shock, right? Of being in person with a bunch of different people and that. But it was just really focused and really powerful and able to drive conversations, which I think is just, is something that's needed. And then that, I got back from this conference and was man, how am I going to crash land this plane now? I've been, at Rice, hanging out with breakfast with Vallée, going to hear Diana give a talk, and then spend some buddy time with Jeff Kreipel, go hang out with just different people in that. So where do you go from there? So but when I got back, what I realized was that having spent so long in the digital world, which a lot of these people don't, right? Jeff's not on Twitter and doing that kind of stuff. That's not his deal. He's an assistant dean and he's not interested in being the Twitter guy. But it was an opportunity to bring these conversations into social media to some extent, and to also use the kind of high that I was on from this conference to continue that with everybody I already know, right? Like, and continue and like start to build those bridges and start to build that conversation. Because the thing is like with Rice doing this, we all have an opportunity now to do this at such a higher level, right? Like Jay brought up the fact that somebody called Jeff Captain America's shield because he is the assistant dean in the School of Humanities at Rice, right? Which is like just under Ivy League. And he says it's okay to talk about this stuff, right? You've got Gary Noland at Stanford. He says it's okay to talk about this stuff. You know, you've got all of these different people that are dealing with this thing, and not saying that it's okay to be stupid about it, or it's okay to just like, you know, run into some sort of like pastel new age delusion, right? But that it's okay to talk about our experiences. It's okay to deal with this, which I think we all already kind of knew. And I mean, obviously on Conspirinormal, like it's not like this is some hidden secret, right? But like to take that that empowerment and sort of, you know, start to really push it.
Well, and honestly, the academic world might be one of the only parts of society that largely doesn't know that it's okay yet to talk about these things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they have so many resources and so many tools.
Were there any media presence there covering this? And
No. And that's, I mean, because so the media coverage was literally like, I guess if my like weird social mediation is media, like I would have been the media there. There were documentary like people there, like the man, I'm going to forget his name because I literally just met him. The guy who did Love and Saucers was there.
Okay.
Let me find his name because I feel like a jerk because I did.
You talking about the guy who directed the film or the guy who
Brad Abrams. Yeah, Brad Abrams was there.
It's a great documentary, by the way. It's
a fantastic documentary.
Very well done.
Yeah, and he sat down, you know, and started talking. And I wasn't really clear on like who he was. And then he mentioned Love and Saucers. And I was like, oh man, like that was a fantastic documentary. Like that was really good. And that's the kind of thing too, is like you're sitting there and like somebody comes up and is like, oh, hey, like, you know, and you start to talk and then you realize, oh, this guy directed Love and Saucers. Like that's awesome, you know? And because it was so laid back, you know, I mean, it was just so, you know, again, because I think in part because of the fact of COVID restrictions meant that it was a smaller group of people, mostly like people who were speaking or who you know, already had some idea of who was there, you know. But, you know, discovering people, talking to people afterwards, you know, sort of building these connections, which I think can really like amp up, you know, what everybody is doing. You know, I'm going to be, my friend Tex Crawford, who's a folk artist here in the Athens area, Athens, Georgia. He and I this year, I think in October is when we've got it scheduled for, are going to be putting on an art exhibit in the Athens Clark County Library. You know, he had, when we first started planning it, he was like, we can probably get a better venue. And I was like, no, I want it at the community library. Like I want to do it at the community library. Like I don't want like, yeah, with people. I don't want some like, you know, like venue. Like I want the library. Like that's what I want. But going to this archive, you know, and thinking about like, oh, is it possible to maybe get some scans of the communion letter drawings, right? Like not the people's names, not like any information like that, but just their drawings about their experience, you know, and then be able to put that alongside some of the folk artists that we're bringing in and outsider artists and that. You know, to build these bridges and to blend this stuff, you know, because it's all about these experiences that we're having with being human in this world, you know, and it's like, I don't know. And so, yeah, it was just obviously like I could just rant for a long time on this conference, but it was very powerful, very nice.
That's awesome.
And honestly, it all the things that you guys do on this podcast or, is it even a podcast? I think you've gone transmedia with Strange Realities and all the rest of it. With your empire, all the things you guys do.
Yes,
with your empire.
The Strange Realities media empire.
Yeah. You know, this was kind of a justification of that. You know, everything Greg's done in terms of Radio Mysterioso and that, because you all stand outside of a lot of what's going on you guys aren't really like trend jumpers. Like you're doing your own thing, you're developing it, you're developing these conversations, you want to have a conversation, about this stuff. Like you don't want to just like push some agenda on it, and I think that that's what came out this weekend was just like, man, everything that all of us have been doing is getting somewhere, and it's meaningful.
Let's talk a little bit more about it. I'd like to know who like your favorite speakers were, who impressed you the most. Was Dr. Finley there by any chance? Did he speak?
Yeah, absolutely. He didn't he did not speak because he had to actually leave in between and come back for a prior engagement, but he was there, which again, like just being able to like go somewhere and like Steven's there. Like I love Stephen Finley, and like if I can be in the same room with him, like that's awesome, and having a chance to just briefly chat with him and just share in that moment. Marcus Red was there, who is a specialist in African cosmologies, and he's just this fantastic scholar. He's done some work in the book on African esotericism, that Stephen edited. Marcus has a piece in there on Sun Ra, and he's got a piece in there on Ishmael Reed, both of which are brilliant. And Marcus is another person I just love, like having a chance to talk to him in person, sit down. We had dinner a couple times, be able to sit there and talk to him was awesome. He does these amazing kind of installation pieces on like billboards that feature like African cosmological like myths that he's put up in I believe it's the Philadelphia area. But that it's just awesome, and that Rice facilitated us being able to sit down and talk. And like, the whole thing about academia, which kind of gets lost, is its whole goal is to build knowledge, right? And then knowledge leads to wisdom. And so knowledge is arranging of facts and information and being able to make it a functional thing. And that's what academia is there to do. So when you have these people here, all of whom have different knowledge bases, all of whom have different experience bases, all of whom have different networks, right? Like, of connections and all the rest of it. When you put these people together, it makes everything better. It makes everything grow. And that's really what this was facilitated by. In terms of like impressed, like there's not a single person in all of academia, I would say, who can read from a piece of paper, who can present a paper the way that Jeff Kripal can. Like he is like the master. I told him, I was like, man, like any opportunity to hear you read a piece of paper, like I'm there for it, because he just has this way of like, his writing is poetic and beautiful. It's powerful. And he's just got this like calm presentation. And he always starts out like, I'm going to give a formal paper, and it's like disarms you like, oh shit, we're going to sit through a formal paper and it's going to be terrible. And then he like opens the gate to a new world through his like presentation. So, was an awesome chance to be by that again. In terms of like presentations that really were sort of groundbreaking, I thought the Experiencer panel, which was interesting, it had some people that I wouldn't have expected on there. I thought that was really good. Annalisa Ventola, who's the executive director of the Parapsychological Association. I didn't realize that she was actually a psi experiencer, like openly, right? Like talking about like utilizing psi and experiencing psi. That was really awesome to hear her experience. There was Paul Smith was on that one. Always interesting to hear his stuff. Ed May, during his presentation on Stargate and psychic functioning, he actually had a slide featuring the executive ESP book by Douglas Dean, which, I mean, as you guys know, that is one of my favorite, like the executive ESP thing is like one of my favorite areas of this thing. So to see him like put that book up and be like, this is a great book, I talked to him about it afterwards, and he was like, I really wish that I could replicate some of these studies and that we could do this again, that was great. I mean, just seeing executive ESP, writ large on a screen was amazing. I mean, honestly, like the best parts were the parts of just talking to people afterwards. And I got to meet, Klaus Vaughn, who's the head of the chair of the archives for the unexplained in Sweden, which is just a fantastic resource. They've uploaded so many digital documents. Håkan Blomqvist's blog, he's one of the archivists there. His blog is just, it's so great to read. He writes a lot on the interstice of theosophy and ufology, and like esotericism and ufology. He writes a lot about Borderland Science Research Associates and Foundation, which is one of my favorite like historic organizations in the field, and Mead Lane and Mark Probert. So it was cool to meet Klaus because I got to tell him that he was awesome. And
I see that friend of the show, S. Miles Lewis, was also on that panel archiving the impossible.
Yeah, and he got to feature the archives that he's put together, which was awesome. And that's a perfect example, right? Smiles is there presenting on the work that he's doing, right? And he's not an academic. He's built this thing from the ground up, and he's sitting there with the archivist from the University of West Georgia, who has the Ingo Swann holdings and the William Roll holdings. William Roll was a parapsychologist from the University of West Georgia who did a lot of poltergeist studies. Actually wrote a book called Poltergeist. He did a lot of stuff with PK in that.
Wasn't he involved with the haunting in Georgia case? Like the that's exactly he came in on that. And then so Smiles is there, presenting right next to Glenn, who's the archivist for University of West Georgia, and Klaus, who has this 15 buildings for the archives for the unexplained. 15 buildings, like the worth of stuff. That's crazy, right? Like it's insane. Like, I mean, buildings, right? Like not rooms, buildings. 15 buildings, all on the same block that they've like funded and done. And Klaus had built this thing up as well. He built it up with a network of volunteers and donations and private funding and stuff. So, and then there's Smiles. Oh, and also the archivist for Rice. And there's Smiles, who's built this thing from the ground up. It's his passion. And Klaus was impressed with some of the things that Smiles had been able to pull in, some of the collections that he has in his thing. And then it was also able to talk about the struggles, right? Like, because that's a perfect example of here you've got University of West Georgia, which is a public institution. You have Rice, which is a private school, right? And the struggles that they have with maintaining stuff, with holding these collections. And then the troubles that Smiles has with raising rents, right? Like, because he's privately funding this thing.
Yeah, in Austin too, which is like suffering pretty bad gentrification.
Yeah. Right. It's expensive.
And you're able to see like these things are worth something, right? It's worth something for the intellectual history and the ability to keep this knowledge as a holder of this information, and the struggles to do that, and the archivist at the university is talking about, we can't take everything in, like and they also had the archive from Manitoba, which has the Hamilton funds, which are famous psychical research from Canada that has a lot of stuff on physical mediumship and a lot of photos and that, some of which are featured in Shannon Taggart's book Seance. They had the lead archivist from up there talking about, the struggles of what do you do with objects, right? Like if you're an archive, like it's easy-ish to store papers kind of, but it's still a lot of space, and then you've got to worry about the paper deteriorating and all of that. But what do you do when you're trying to store objects, right? Like some of the there was examples that Leslie Kane gave of archives in Europe of some of the materialism, the physical mediumship stuff, the materialized hands. They have molds of those, but like that's it's this fragile like plaster hand from like,
that becomes like a museum question.
yeah. And an archive is not a museum, right? So like, how do you, and all of this stuff takes money. It all takes resources. It all takes interest from the public, which requires the media to deal with it, somewhat sympathetically, if not, you don't have to believe, but to be sympathetic to the historical weight of this stuff. And that's this massive infrastructure of culture that we don't necessarily have around these topics. It's starting to be, obviously there's more museums that are starting to do, and galleries and that are doing occult art shows now, but that all took work. That was Pam Grossman and the folks at Morbid Anatomy building networks of people. That was Mitch Horowitz. That was a bunch of different people working to build these networks so that the resources and the interest could be there, so that it would eventually get to the level where a museum would be like, oh, okay, this is worth us putting on an exhibit and, having funding in that. So, it was a really interesting kind of conversation, which just going back to Smiles, it was awesome for him to be there as, he built this from like the ground up. He built this from like Discordian networks, right? Like he built this from this, 90s, kind of conspiracy culture almost. And for him to sit at that table as an equal, and that was what this was about, because this stuff doesn't exist in the ivory tower, It's like you said, like academia may be one of the places where it doesn't, where people are still ignoring it. And that's kind of like Jeff's thing, is like, that's what his book, The Flip, is about, is how do we flip the resource holders? Like, how do we get them to realize that this is an important issue through their own experiences, right? Because there's a lot of scientists that have experiences that just can't talk about them, or they don't feel comfortable talking about them, or they do talk about them, but they don't put any weight to them, professionally.
And something like this will, hopefully help people like Smiles and these other archives, by giving that official recognition somewhere. I wanted to comment on how, as far as moving conversations forward, that's really the best way to do it, is to have an archive with these different collections that are interrelated. If someone is doing research in something, there will be this other material around that is related that can then like expand their view of what they're actually researching.
Right. And that Jeff actually has a term for that. He calls it collection is connection. Right. So like the collection is the connection, and you put the pieces together by having them all together. And, and that's something that I was actually talking about earlier with Jay and Sean from Witness Citizen, the idea that there's this weird mediated silos around these topics, right? Like
exactly.
People don't want to talk to UFO people. Neither one of them want to talk to psychic people. Some of that's changed. Like UFO people are now like really into out of body experiences and psychic stuff. But it's weirdly mediated and weirdly siloed and weirdly cliquish. And so how do we break that? Because we're all living in this world where people encounter Bigfoot, and they also encounter a UFO, and they also have precognition. And, what does that mean? Right? Like, I'm not saying that like it's real or it's not real. It's just these experiences happen, or they're reported. And so what does that mean? And it doesn't help to like isolate all these things and become obsessed with one area and, say everything else is crap, and there were times where it wasn't that way. And there's been researchers in the past that it wasn't that way. And the best researchers in the past didn't put up those blinds, or, and there's specialization, and there's people that have been really good at specific areas and stayed focused on that. And that's very like helpful, as long as they don't, then turn the whole conversation into just this narrow lane that it all has to be in. And unfortunately, despite the fact that digital communication is decentralized, it's really centralized a lot of stuff, and it's really like siloed off a lot of stuff because people move to their cliques. It becomes an echo chamber, and that was one of the things about this, was it was kind of an opportunity to break through those echo chambers and to talk across lines. I mean, there were academics there that, obviously like a lot of the people that are around Kripal and are around this topic are very sympathetic to the paranormal, right? Like very sympathetic. And And that may not be where the conversation goes, right? Like there has to be that other side where there's not necessarily the sympathy, but more rigor in that.
Yeah.
So there were people there who didn't come from the sympathy side of academia. They came from an ethnographic side, right? Like an embedded side of studying it as, sort of more from an objective frame, right? Like still sympathetic to a certain extent, enough to cover it maturely, but not coming from this like more, like they weren't necessarily scholar practitioners, they weren't necessarily scholar experiencers, and there was a bit of like where they were like, oh, okay, this is different. It was like being put in the deep end of the pool with this stuff where, because you start to see like, I mean, you can hear all this stuff about Whitley, right? Like you can go and cherry pick things he's written, or you can look at his podcast and say, oh, he said this, he didn't say this, he's lying here, all the kind of stuff we see on social media and in critiques and that. But when you hang out with the guy for a weekend, right, and he doesn't change his script, you know what I mean? Like he doesn't change who he is. He says the same things that he's always said. He's not acting, he wakes up tired, like, you know what I mean? Like he's a guy. Like you can't, the stuff that's been said about Diana Pasulka, like when you spend a weekend with these people, like they're no longer, you can't have the same interaction with the ideas. It's not like, it's a conversation then, right? Like it's not just like a weird, this is right, this is wrong, these people are lying, they're not lying, they're whatever. You've got to actually deal with them as people. Obviously I made that jump a long time ago. I co-authored a piece with Diana and that, like, and have written about Whitley. So like I don't, I'm not on that side, but it's, with Leslie Kane's work, I was not very familiar with it. I stayed away from it. It was very UFO-y in the ways that I don't really like. So I wasn't familiar with it. And I came out of the weekend seeing her as a human being, and that, like, going into it, like I wasn't too sure because I'm not familiar with her stuff. And the media, Leslie Kane, is not necessarily something I'm interested in. But as a person, it's totally different. And I think that was, again, just that the connections that were developed there, I think was very helpful to the conversation. And I wish everybody could have that. I wish like hardline skeptics could have just an immersive weekend with the stuff to at least come out of it and realize that these are people, not just, faces in the media that can be, deconstructed in weird ways.
Yeah, it's more complex than what they are. It's less black and white than what they think it is. I think it's really great that someone like Kripal and also Dr. Finley and Diana, that I guess she's Walsh now. I don't think she's Pasulka anymore, right? I think she's
right. I actually talked to her about that because I always feel weird saying Pasulka, but it's on her book, so it's like that, but that's what people recognize her as. So it's become almost like her writing name, we'll see how that changes with the next book or if it changes, but it's a weird place when you write a book and then your name changes. I was like, I feel awkward when I have to say this, but like in public, like nobody would know.
What are you going to do when you change your last name to Starchild?
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, I'll ascend. I'll be ascended at that point.
Starchild Maximus Prime. I think it's excellent that academia, at least a small portion of it, especially within the religious studies community, that they have taken an interest in this, because that's really what we're dealing with, is just another variety, I think, of religious experience. And so that's something that I came to on my own from listening to doing this podcast, listening to other podcasts, the reading that I've done from all the authors that I've had on and everything. So just knowing that this is something that, this modern day form of religious experience is something that, academics are taking a serious look at. It's taken out of the whole sensationalist context that we see it in all the time on television and in the media. And it's a serious look at it. And I was curious as you were speaking about this and you were using the word psi, and a lot of this conference seems to be about this contact experience. Are you equating the contact experience as a form of psi?
I think that's so. My friend Hussein Ali Agrama from University of Chicago, he was actually in one of the preliminary webinars, and he was supposed to come to the conference, but he wasn't able to make it. In his preliminary webinar, he circled around something that Whitley has said a lot, and which actually I think Carl Sagan said as well, which is that we need better questions, and that's one of the better questions, right? Like, one, like psi itself is an ambiguous term. It's kind of defined as everything that it isn't, which it's not very helpful when you're studying something, to define things in the negative. But yeah, I mean, you think about Vallet's, I can't remember the name of the paper, but he wrote that paper with Eric Davis, the physicist, which was like 6 factors in terms of an actual UFO encounter, right? It's got a much better name, but because it has a better name, I can't remember it offhand. But the psychic aspect was one of them, in terms of people either being activated or experiencing the thing through some sort of, telepathic communication. You think mind speak, right? Like in cryptozoology or Sasquatch studies. But yeah, so I mean, there's a psychic element to it, and that is kind of danced around in some of Gary Nolan and Kit Green's work with the Caudate Putnam, however you pronounce that, the center part of the brain, showing different developments in it, more connectivity after experiencers have encountered a UFO. Or something UFO-like. They've encountered the phenomena, and that connectivity tying into enhanced intuition potentially. So there is kind of an element of contact that has this psychic. Valet has that. I believe it's the British print of The Invisible College, which is called UFOs: The Psychic Solution. I don't think it's a separate book, but it may be. But yeah, so he had one of the titles that Valet has used for his work was UFOs: The Psychic Solution, and tying it into that kind of experience. And, that really, and this is where this stuff goes to, is because like consciousness studies, right? We have it as a term, people throw it around. What is consciousness? Like these are all like, they're yet to be filled categories. We have these experiences, but the actual, like there hasn't been the resources and people haven't been doing the actual groundwork to get this together on a wide level. Obviously there's individual, scholars, researchers and whatnot. There's a ton of books out. But there's, like really basic stuff that we need to start addressing, and that was something that Hussein was highlighting in the pre-event webinar, was just, we need better questions. We need better questions so that we can start to really understand what we're even talking about, right. That's something that Diana's focused in her work, is our experiences are so mediated. And the more technology we have, and the more, the technology starts to blend with our daily life and smartphones and the whole thing that you can read a million articles complaining about. The more that happens, the more it necessitates these questions, these deeper questions about what exactly are we seeing, right? Like, what exactly is this? Because you think Ray Palmer, right? Ray Palmer publishes
Yeah.
the Shaver Mysteries.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, it's always been mediated, though.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so what is it, right? Like that's, and that kind of comes out of where Kripal's idea of the authors of the impossible, right? Here are these people that write this stuff almost into existence while they're studying it, right? Like they study the phenomena, they write about the phenomena, and then suddenly the phenomena starts to occur in ways that they're writing about it. And this weird loop and this textuality to the phenomena, like what does that mean? Right? Like what does it mean that early sci-fi stuff prior to 1947 was showing flying discs, and then suddenly people are seeing flying discs after a reporter uses a wrong term for what Kenneth Arnold's describing, and like hardline skeptics in that being like, well, it just means it doesn't exist and it's stupid. Like that's a weird reaction, right? Like, because it's a lot deeper than that, and it's a lot more odd that happens than to simply say like, oh, well, it just means that people are having a mass hallucination. Like, what does that mean? That's just another like meaningless, and it's a defensive reaction, which means, you're hitting at a core of something that's really bothersome to some people, so what does that mean? Right? Like, I mean, there's so many questions to kind of dig into with that. And that's one of the, one of the kind of things which actually is sort of floats around the Star Children and Psychic Futures talk, is this moment in time in the 70s where you have Edgar Mitchell in the early 70s publishing Psychic Explorations, which is an anthology kind of covering the state of the field at the time in the early 70s, with some of the same people that would go into the government psychic programs and the more official psychic studies that happened during the 70s and 80s, writing their kind of like theory pieces at the time and their applied pieces and studies and that, putting it in an anthology. And in the beginning of the anthology, in the intro, Edgar Mitchell specifically says, we're not going to look at UFOs, right? But then in 1975, Brad Steiger and John White put out an anthology, the Other Worlds, Other Universes anthology, which I've talked about this stuff before with you guys, but this really points to kind of the question that you're asking, like the, contact and psi. So they put out this thing in 75 where John White is one of the co-founders of the Institute of Noetic Science with Edgar Mitchell, right? So suddenly, early in the 70s, it's like, we're not going to look at UFOs because it would complicate the issue too much. But then John White and Brad Steiger put together this anthology that has like Rudolf Steiner in it. It has Jacques Vallée in it. It has Timothy Leary in it. It has David Spangler from the Findhorn stuff. All of them writing these pieces on the sort of apocalyptic aspect of the UFO, of what does it represent, and really hearkening back to stuff that people like Millen Cook, who wrote in 1947 a piece called Son of the Sun, writing about this weird sort of, what does the UFO mean in terms of like a new transition for humanity, right? Which can go in a bad direction, in terms of how it's used. Obviously, you have a lot of examples of those kind of thoughts being like bad, but the hope in the human potential thing is that it leads to more peace and more prosperity and unity and a whole Earth vision, which comes out of Edgar Mitchell's overview effect experience and the astronauts overview
Cosmic
effect.
Consciousness,
Cosmic consciousness, which is, and it's super, that's again the questions, right? You've got in the 19th century this concept of cosmic consciousness, right? And it's not until they send up astronauts that look down on the Earth that you really know what it is experientially, right? People were experiencing something that was cosmic consciousness in the 19th century, but then you have people physically experiencing both the cosmic consciousness sort of, expansion, and physically being above the planet and seeing these relationships, and that's a massive change. And you have the change even when we sent satellites up, where our perspective shifted. And our perspective of who we are, what we're doing, what all this means. And all of it was tied to psychism, and all of it was tied to psychical research. And all of it, embedded within psychical research were these narratives going forward. You think of William James' Varieties of Religious Experience, right? He's talking about these peak states. He's talking about cosmic consciousness. He's talking about these mystical states, which are then physically enacted through the astronauts, through the satellites, through the rest of it. And during the space program, you've got Ingo Swann and Harold Sherman being a popularizer of ESP, who'd published, like how to, I forget what this, it's a bunch of books in the like 50s and 60s about utilizing ESP to better your life, right? And so Harold Sherman and Ingo Swann do a remote viewing of Jupiter ahead of the Pioneer mission to actually take photos of Jupiter. And then they checked to see, what in their psychic exploration of Jupiter matched up with the photos and that. So there's this interaction between psychism, the technology, the culture that was going on, and all of it bleeding out into the wider culture and the public culture of how we view ourselves. I mean, you think of like Gil Scott-Heron, Whitey's on the moon, right? Like, that's because there was technology that could get to the moon. It brought that whole question of where are we putting our resources? What does it mean that we've got some people walking on the moon when, my sister's here like suffering, right? Like, what does this mean? And so it's, it's really interesting to have an opportunity again, because it's kind of like these things go in like these waves, maybe under a slightly different way. Like you said, it's now sort of in religious studies and that, but to have a way to start to talk about this stuff again, and hopefully move forward. I mean, we're like, with the Russian situation and that, like, we're sitting on the edge of like another like world war or another like really nasty Cold War, which has already been kind of going for a while. I mean, really. Right. So, now's like the time where it's like, it's not the time to be snarking on people on Twitter. It's time to be like digging into what it means to be human and start to actually have mature conversations about, and that's where, for as goofy as the new age stuff can get, and as flaky and white and just kind of negative and granola, like all the critiques you can have of the new age thing, right? Like at the base, the idea of human potential and the idea of moving that forward and all of us exploring human potential is not a bad thing.
Right. And a lot of that came from the height of the Cold War, when those existential questions, as we talked about before, were really apparent. And it was just about human survival, period.
Right.
Which we're still in that situation, but the consciousness is not there.
Right. Yeah. And, John Mack's abduction research came out of groups of psychologists and scientists and thinkers that were dealing with existential threat of nuclear war and climate collapse. That was really where he was, came into the abduction research stuff. So it was the questions, that we see today on ancient aliens and that, have these other sort of, roots, right. and then they can be returned to that.
You're talking about Strieber, right?
No, this is, Strieber did write like, the novels in the 80s about climate crisis and nuclear.
Yeah, he was, there is that part in Communion where they show him like the nuclear explosion and they say, this is your world. But you see, he had been researching for War Day,
right,
at that time.
Yeah.
So it kind of reflected back to him his fears and his anxieties. Yeah.
Right. Well, I was actually mentioning John Mack. The abduction researcher. He came out of a group, sort of a loose-knit think tank group. And then that actually became a center that was looking at existential risk and was looking at like, how culture is dealing with the stress, because it's an unspoken thing, like this stress that sort of hovers under everything, especially when it's becoming less under the surface with something like what's going on in the Ukraine. But it was always it's always there. You think about, Syria, you can list off the conflicts that are constantly raging around the world.
Right.
You know, it's not, it's never been, you know, necessarily under the rug, but I mean, that's all of those things. And that's what, you know, Jose Herrera, right? Like that's what his work is looking at, is like, we don't take into account the epigenetic damage that's caused by the mediation and flood of constant violence, messaging of violence, and, you know, death and mayhem and stuff that goes on globally. And as we connect everything into this like information structure that's constantly feeding us this stuff, like it's literally like it's killing the organism, you know. I mean, it's not positive.
I'll tell you, yeah, Twitter is like one of the biggest. Just like, it is such a cesspit. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's really, I've discovered a channel for anxiety.
Yeah, and
it makes you anxious.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you're plugging into that stuff, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that was one of the Mark Bacuzzi at Windbridge. He did a study on radionics. He's developing a symbolic Hieronymus machine to predict the election, and so he did a study on that, and it kind of tied into the idea of some of the work he was doing with psi-forms, right? Where you have these random number generators hooked up, you're putting an intention into the random number generator, that data is being fed into another program that then develops a visual display of that intention, right, through the data. So you put the intention into the random number generator, it affects the random number generator, that develops a data set goes to a visual, right? Or what, you know, whatever it is. He does these kind of like abstract images that come out of that. So if you think about the sort of mirrored effect of, okay, so if I'm putting an intention into a random number generator that's developing, you know, that goes into something else, right? Like a radio. Like it's almost like I'm not saying there's transmissions happening, right? But like whatever that function is, it's very similar to a radio, and you hear on a radio what comes out, right? So those images, in a certain sense, are carrying that information, right? Mm-hmm. So what does that mean when on Twitter, anxiety, anger, frustration, like impotence, you know, I mean, all of that is just flooding into people's, you know, what they're putting out on the digital media. And then that's getting spread all over, you know, the globe, and hitting other people's, you know, weak spots in there.
And it's going through algorithms that are just amplifying the worst of all of that.
Yeah, amplifying it, focusing it, pouring it into your mind stream. You know, I mean, it's, you know, and what do we do with that, right? I mean, that's, and then on top of all of that, then you have all of the weird stuff, right? You get people encountering UFOs, and you have people encountering Bigfoot, and you have all this stuff. So, you know, it's, I don't know. I mean, how do you look at all of that? How do you look at the big picture?
You mentioning John Mack, I think that he would have fit in very well with this crowd, because he was really taken as, I mean, I don't think he was fully understood at his time for what he was doing academically, and he had just, so his only outlet really was kind of like these more sensationalist radio shows like Coast to Coast and all this. But the way he understood the phenomenon was exactly the same way I think the Kripal understands it.
Yeah, absolutely. His work was brought up. You know, he had colleagues and stuff that have, Keith Thompson who wrote Angels and Aliens.
Right.
You know, he was friends with John and a colleague of John's. So he, you know, yeah, that's definitely, and that, you know, and that's kind of the thing too, like the way these people are framed, you know, again, like John Mack, like it becomes a name, it becomes a thing that you can project onto, like, well, he's an abduction researcher. Oh, he's a Harvard psychologist that looked at aliens. All of these things, you talk to the Dalai Lama. I mean, like there's so many just like mimetic structures to all of these people who literally have like sacrificed their careers, their personal lives, you know, the whole thing to go out and talk about this stuff in public at a higher level. and what do they get for it? They get like crapped on even by the people who like would appreciate them, and it's really strange. I've seen that with Diana and that, where it's like, what is triggered in your mind that you need to be so cruel and like strange with this stuff? So it's, it was interesting this weekend not to have any of that, and again, there were people there who disagreed with each other. It wasn't like everyone was on the same page or something. I mean, there's definite disagreements amongst things, but it doesn't have to be nasty. It doesn't have to be, because that's not what we're doing. That's not what the hope is.
Yeah, we've seen that effect of getting people together in the physical world, fostering civility. We've definitely seen that. In the Strange Realities events.
There was some peacemaking going on.
Most definitely. I wanted to touch on the panel that you were a part of. Is called Public Cultures and the Impossible. Can you talk a little bit about that while we're still on the Archives of the Impossible?
Yeah. It was interesting. So that panel got changed a bunch of times from the initial a month or two ago when it was announced to the end when we actually gave the panel. Like, it actually changed like the day of the beginning of the conference on who was going to be there. Stuart Davis, who was one of the co-founders of the Experience Group, who had he's an artist musician I mentioned earlier. He was supposed to be there and lead the group. Prior to that, Josh Boone, who directed New Mutants, was supposed to be there. Both of them had things come up, so they weren't able to make the conference. So Cameron Hammond ended up leading it. She's a lecturer at Rice who's written a memoir of her experience coming out of evangelical Christianity and sort of finding a wider world. I forget what the name of the memoir is, but it's essentially about like the objectification of women in evangelical Christianity and what it was like to be in that while seeking some kind of spiritual truth, and then coming out of that, so she actually became the leader of the panel, which was awesome. She did an amazing job of kind of curating questions. Greg Bishop presented on the ufology tarot that Miguel has done the illustrations for, and a group of us have kind of worked to theorize and to put into action. He showed the Kickstarter commercial for it, which was awesome because the music in that thing is from Massimo Teodorani, who is Susan Demeter's husband, but he's also he's like a world-class Italian astrophysicist who loves Berlin School synthesizer music. And so the music in this thing was Massimo Teodorani, who later was referenced in one of the plenary speakers as being one of the like leading scholars looking at the UFO issue and consciousness. So it was great just to have like, oh, well, the commercial for the ufology tarot, of course, has like his mood music in it, right? And then there was, let me find his name. That's the other thing. Like you get. Like,
you got a nice pamphlet there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is Angelo John Lewis, who actually runs a networking group of professionals. It's like the Spiritual Action Network or something like that. But he just a really interesting guy that kind of came out of the 90s, like innovation and business networking and group, how to build groups, how to create group synergy and that kind of thing. And then there was Marcus Red, who I mentioned before, does African cosmology and is just an amazing artist and filmmaker. He's so like so much a polymath. It's hard to define like what he's doing because top level. I mean, his scholarship's impeccable. It's awesome. And then there was Jay King, the co-founder of the the experiencer group. And Jay, you know, just a super nice guy, like just incredibly, like one of those people that you're like, wow, you were just a genuinely nice person, like, which is awesome. So, it was interesting because the public discourses thing, we were all kind of there because we're in certain ways, and the stuff that we're doing, we're bridging what's happening in academia, and trying to bring it forward into some kind of public discourse, you know. And so it was, and each of us in a different way, you know. So it was an interesting kind of different ways that can be done, you know. And the question of like how to do it effectively, I think, was still open at the end. You know, how do you bring super complex ideas, you know? And something that I brought up was living in rural Georgia, encountering people that are good Christians who go to church on Sunday, who also are completely infected with ancient aliens ideas and are now reading the Book of Enoch and obsessed with the Watchers and obsessed with demonic UFOs because they've been watching Ancient Aliens because it's such a popular TV show, you know. And having a different perspective on that, a scholarly perspective, like how do you bridge that, right? Like how do you make the next Ancient Aliens but make it so that it's more, I mean, don't get me wrong, like David Childress, you know, like Adventures Unlimited, I've got the catalog, it's fun, you know. But like when it hits rural America and it becomes a fostering of weird ideas that can, as we've seen over the last few years, can have massive ramifications in culture. There's an ethical question there, not necessarily for the Ancient Aliens show, but for, you know, the need for other venues to feature these ideas that aren't quite as I don't know, that don't quite foster that level of animus in culture, you know.
Right, exploitative.
Yeah, exploitative, you know. And again, I mean, like I love Adventures Unlimited, and I love, honestly, like when I see something come out, like a UFO story, right? Like, because there's so much of that now where it's like the government has said this, or some guy in some office made a bill that did something with a UFO. I always wait until the Sun publishes it, or the Daily Mail, or something like that, because it's so much, you know, like you're going to get the same basic information. Mm-hmm. It's going to be written much better. It's going to be weird. They're going to have a horrible picture with it. Everything about that for me is better. But, you know, when it gets out into the public like that, and that's all you have, like that's problematic. And I think that actually points to the problem, is that when it's given to you straight, nowadays it's awful. It seems like it's written by a computer, you know. And when it's given to you by the tabloids, you know, in the past, like you had somebody like Bob Pratt who knew Jacques Vallée, and like the National Enquirer, for whatever other stuff they were doing, their UFO coverage is actually pretty good. It may be written a little sensationally, but there's some good stuff in there, you know. Beckley, right? Like there's some good articles in some of those Beckley things, surrounded by, you know, a sort of sideshow like tabloidness, but there's still some like meat there, you know. And now we have the separation of just tabloid and like just boring, and there's no middle. I mean, I haven't watched TV in a long time, and since the Ukraine thing happened, I started watching network news on YouTube. It's horrible. Yeah, like the only way that anyone can think that that's okay and that's a proper way to present news is that they've watched it like consistently. Because if you go away for a while and you come back to it, that like what is, I mean, that makes no sense. Like it's like it's horrible, it's awful. And you can see the difference by just like going back. Like we actually you know, went and looked at, okay, like, because it was so shocking to see this, went back and was like, where did this break? Like, where did it go from like, you could kind of think that this was a mature presentation of information to just being like this like mind jamming like nightmare feed, you know? And like there's actually like a point like where it starts to like just like crack and become plastic and weird, and like lots of makeup, and you know, people that look like robots, and like, I mean, it's odd. So
what's the year for that then?
It was actually, I believe it was the year that the blood moon stuff happened, the last blood moon, that was just an awesome coincidence. I happened to like realize, I was like, oh man, he was right. John Hagee was right. It was the blood moon prophecy.
Of course. Yeah. It all starts with that. Well, I wanted to point out that on your Facebook page, you've got a picture. Speaking of beliefs, and this is a picture from a Walmart of the Aliens magazine.
Yeah.
Like on the newsstand, and like, you know, flanking the Aliens magazine is John Wayne.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, it's the 2022 Walleye Guide for the trade secret lures and rigs.
Yeah.
Right behind the Aliens on the rack is Guns and Ammo. Behind that is Wild West. Next to those two is something about Bon Jovi, and behind that is Guns N' Roses.
That's right.
And then Elvis, then Elvis on in the other part, and then behind him is Cowboys and Indians. So
got all of America represented.
Yeah, it was when I saw that, I was like, "Oh, this is beautiful!" Like right here, we have this says so much.
That is Americana. Yeah.
I mean, I was surprised Hustler wasn't on the.
Yeah, right. The Walmart.
It's Walmart.
Well, at the Walmart, they have the D&D handbook right next to that too, and then you can get your Joel Osteen. Like it's just like a smorgasbord of like all of these like weird things. But that alien book really fast. I'd seen this thing like a bunch of times, right? Like I'd seen it sitting there and kind of hovering, and I was always like, "Oh, that's cool. That's there. Okay." And I hadn't, I kind of flipped through, I think, the previous version of this, which was called something else about UFOs. UFO Guide, like the Ultimate UFO Guide, I think is what this same company was putting out last year.
Same magazine, but like just different cover. Is that what you're saying?
I'm wondering. Yeah, I was actually looking for that. I was actually looking for the Ultimate UFO Guide, but they took that out like before I could like get to it. When I finally decided that I would like put my brain to it. Yeah, I've been kind of like avoiding it. Like I don't know if I want to actually like look at this thing. Like I'll look at it on the shelf, but I don't know if I want to like crack it open. And I'd skimmed a little bit of it, and it seemed to come from a little bit more of a skeptical sort of like haha funny, not even as like accepting as like a Discovery Channel documentary or something. Like it seemed to really come from like a nasty sort of like these people suck kind of way, but we're going to give you these pictures to make you like, ooh, aliens. And then like, no, actually like there's no. So I actually took the time to look at this one that was at Walmart, and it's literally a skeptical magazine, which is amazing because the cover, it looks like you're going to get like an ancient alien deep dive, but no, you're going to get like SETI, and then like some like weird like Mork and Mindy photos, and like, I mean, it's just like, it is like the most cynical publication that you could think of on aliens. Not even, I mean, honestly, I'd rather read Skeptical Inquirer because at least there's like some like teeth there or something. This is just like sloppy Wikipedia skepticism jammed with like weird like archival photos and like stock art, stock photos of aliens and stuff.
It's basically the Wikipedia article at the bottom of the YouTube that you're watching.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah, it's the, like fact checkers have, like shown that this is all crap. And it was just weird. I was like, wow, they went to like a lot of effort to put out something that like, it wasn't, because I mean, like, I don't know. Yeah, it was odd.
I've seen that recently a couple times, and some of the most speculative shit you can imagine. Like, I think I was watching like an actual scholar on the real Illuminati, like one of the leading ones, like talking about the actual history of Illuminati.
One of the two.
They had that Wikipedia article at the bottom, so I knew officially, the official story Illuminati coming from Wikipedia.
Yeah, don't listen to the scholar. Listen to the Wikipedia.
But I have yet to see like what I always dream of seeing, which is like the young version of myself like pulling out his mom's shirt and lying, trying to get her to buy him the like UFO magazine, because I will volunteer.
know.
I'm like, ma'am, I'll buy that.
They're probably going for the Bon Jovi magazine. That's probably what it is.
The Guns N' Roses, like getting that, like,
right.
or maybe the wall. I mean, honestly, where I'm at, like it'd be the Walleye. That would be the
Or John Wayne.
Yeah, or the John Wayne one. And see that what weirds me out though is that like there's obviously a market opportunity. You know, like there's obviously a market opportunity. And this company, Centennial Media, that puts the UFO ones out, the website is literally just an email. Like there's no content on the website whatsoever. The only way that you can really find out like what they've published is on like eBay or like Amazon. If you like search Centennial Media and find like what the other magazines are, and I think they may have like ads in the back. Like there's no advertisements in these magazines, right? Like there's no outside advertising. They're one-off, like
made for retail
books. Yeah, made for retail. And it seems like and I mean it's a lot of stock art, a lot of like digital archive art. Like you go to like Getty Images and like pull an image of Jacques Vallée or something. So like the cost and the list of contributors is fairly large, which is weird. So like I'm just the whole business model behind it. I'm like, what?
That's probably one of those ads you find on like Craigslist or something for writers wanted.
Writers wanted, write about an alien. But I'm wondering like if there's a market for that thing, right? But they cost like $14. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, why can't there be smarter mass media representations of this stuff?
Right. Yeah, that's that. And for cheaper, right? Like just do some newsprint or something, like make it recyclable. Like people don't care. They buy the Farmer's Almanac. Like nobody, you know, I mean, only like the most pretentious person would be like, oh, these pages aren't glossy enough. You know what I mean? Like,
I think that, I think things used to be a lot more intellectual because, I mean, it used to be you could buy books like that, just like these little trade back paperbacks that had a lot of information. You could buy those in drugstores. You could buy those at grocery stores, you know, and I mean, one of the most interesting things I ever saw in a grocery store, just on like one of the racks that's on like the end of the checkout counter, was like the Golden Dawn, like the
yeah, right.
You know, it was the book of like it was McGregor Mather's Golden Dawn book. I'm like, what the hell, you know? Like,
where was this?
This was in a Kroger in like Atlanta, like the Atlanta area.
What year?
Man, this is probably like 2011, 2012, maybe.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Maybe I stepped out of it. You know, I mean, you know, you never know. I had like this weird where I went into an alternate dimension inside the Kroger, and when I walked out, I was back in ours. You know, I don't know. It's somewhere in Lawrenceville, Georgia. That's where it usually happens.
Just go check the meat prices.
So you are going to be doing something for us coming up in a couple of weeks, or less. By the time this is out, less than 2 weeks, on March 25th, guys. So let's talk a little bit about what you're going to be presenting. Obviously, we don't want to give away the whole shebang because this is going to be pretty extensive. And also, David, unlike the conference where we really pretty much, because of how many speakers we have or whatever, this is going to be you're going to have a lot more time to give your presentation, and also to take questions after. So, give us a little bit of a skinny on Star Children and the Psychic Futures, a little teaser for the audience.
Yeah, so 1979, 1978, Ingo Swann, who helped found the Remote Viewing Project, which became the psychic spy program that many people are familiar with, called Stephen Halpern, who is the godfather of New Age music, and said, I really like what you're doing, and I want you to make the album for the movie, so the soundtrack album for the movie that's going to come out of my novel, Starfire. And Ingo Swann, Stephen Halpern made a rock, disco, funk album that they put out that was supposed to be the soundtrack for this movie that never happened, for a novel that was put out and then very shortly after was sort of pulped, and was shelved, I will say, right? So it wasn't, the publisher didn't push it. Around the same time, Andrzej Puharich was writing about the Geller kids, the space kids, which were kids that were activated by seeing Uri Geller on TV. They had psychokinesis, all this stuff. It was claimed to be a global phenomena, and he wrote a book about it. That book was never published. You can find information about it. You can find even listings in the publishers' magazines of the time, but it doesn't exist, as far as I know, and as far as I can tell, and as far as all the people that I've spoken to can tell. This book never came out. So we're going to kind of all go on this journey through how did we get to a rock, disco, funk album by the pioneer of New Age music, with one of the founders of the government psychic spy program, which embraces this concept of a psychic future, right? Where we're all empowered by our psychic abilities. We've all achieved cosmic consciousness. It's a call to action. It's a call to turn on your drive, your star drive, to enter into that cosmic consciousness. How did we get there from, in the 1900s, people sitting in a seance room and like holding hands, right? And that kind of thing. And then where did it go, right? Like what happened? Obviously, no one knows, nobody knows about this album, right? Like, I mean, people do, it's a curiosity, right? But it didn't have the impact that they'd hoped. There's a lot of mythologizing of this time period and what was going on. If they were such great, and nefarious mind controllers, yet they couldn't even put out an album, right? Like you can get a kid on TikTok that can become a hit now, right? But like Ingo Swann and Stephen Halpern, leaders in their field, they couldn't put out an album, right? Like they couldn't get a movie deal. So kind of go into that and kind of look at the history of psychical research. We're not going to go into what I'll call the boring blah, blah, blah stuff, right? But like really kind of get to the core of that, framed through this album and kind of what happened to the album, how the album came apart, what things led into this stream, right? Because Stephen Halpern is channeling his music, right? He has a download that he's going to create the music of the future. There's so many layers to this thing. And we're kind of going to use that as a jumping off point to explore the current time period, right? And like what went wrong then, what can go right now, what are the misperceptions of that time period, what's been mythologized, like how can we look at that and tease out some of the truth of what was going on, away from the paranoia, away from the mythologizing, away from that, and celebrate this freaking album, because it's the Star Children album. Stephen Halpern just released a remastered version of it. It's $8 on his website. People should go out and buy it and listen to it prior to coming to this thing. They may not enjoy it. It's not everybody's taste. I love it. Chris Corey loves it. So yeah, I'm just gonna really dive into that. I mean, the Space Kids thing is so fascinating. There's so much myth. Again, it's just people are paranoid about kids being experimented on. If you dig into it, if you look into it, right? Like obviously any of these topics you can look into and you can build your little puzzle, right? Like you can take the puzzle box, it's got Notre Dame on the front of it. You open it up, dump out the pieces, make a blobby dog out of it and say, look, I made a dog. It's a dog, right? Because I arranged all these pieces and it's a dog. And the cover is Notre Dame and it's supposed to look like Notre Dame, but you say it's a dog because you've made this abstract looking dog blob, right? We can do that with all this stuff. I'm going to make my own dog blob in this presentation, which avoids the paranoia, avoids that kind of stuff, and actually tries to make something functional out of the history of this thing, and see kind of what's going on. And again, with the Space Kid stuff, Like, what was that? Like, were kids really like suddenly spoon bending because they saw Geller on TV? If they were, where's all that data, right? Like, there's all these studies. It's published. Other stuff's published. Where is it? Where's the book? Andrij Puharic's kids have his material. They put out a lot of archival stuff. Do they have this manuscript? Is it in their hands? We don't know. Why? Because everybody talks about this stuff and they make up stories about it, but nobody contacts his kids. Why? Like, what are, you know? So that's kind of like where we're gonna dance around these things. I haven't contacted his kids either, so I'm also, you know, blaming myself here. But yeah, so that's gonna be, you know, Star Children, Psychic Futures. We're gonna get into it. We're gonna dive into it. It's gonna be a conversation. I'm sure people will have things to say about that. You know, but again, I love that album, and I'm very happy to be able to use that album as kind of a hub on which we can build a wheel and roll into you know, the psychic future. Got to talk about Stephen Halpern. Like, this is an opportunity. Like, new age music, sure, but this guy, I mean, so Starborn Suite is off of Gifts of the Angels, which is his compilation of all the music that he feels was guided by other forces when he was doing it, right? When he was creating it. And flashes of light would happen when he was making this music. He learned how to make the music through channeling. I mean, it's very, very complicated. The album itself is called Star Children.
Mm-hmm. Turn on your drive.
We're going to really focus in on.
That's awesome. Using that to really capture that cultural moment of like this unrealized cosmic future. Well, we're really looking forward to it, David.
It sounds super fascinating. It really does.
This is going to be the second of these streaming events.
Yep.
With the Strange Realities branding, and we really want to thank you for being a part of it. I think this is going to be a lot of fun and give people access to hanging out and talking afterwards, and any questions that they have. And so it's being re-released, but it's not on any kind of streaming services yet. He's only offering it through his website.
No, it's on streaming services as well. You can get it off all the major streamings.
Okay.
Spotify, YouTube, the whole deal.
Excellent. So in preparation for that, we'll start sharing that so everyone can check it out and experience it. And maybe you can provide some guidelines for the best way to
the best listening.
The best listening experience
you can have with Star Children. Yeah, I mean, I really like. I don't know. Have you guys listened to it yet?
Mm-hmm.
I have not.
Oh, Adam, come on, man. Chris and I have both like hard ranted about this stuff like for what, like a year now. You haven't partaken in the Star Children yet, Adam? You're gonna have to listen to it soon.
I just found it. Here it is. It's actually under Ingo Swann. You can look it up under Ingo Swann. Yeah, I will definitely listen to it.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, be prepared because it's going to challenge you. All of our contemporary appreciation of music is challenged by it, I think.
Is there any reason why they did a 44th anniversary edition? Is there some numerology going on there?
There may be. I'm not sure. So Stephen Halpern said that he was going to write the backstory on his website about it, but it was pretty brief. So my friend Dave, who works with East West Bookshop and puts on events there, he's trying to schedule Stephen to come on and talk about the album for an event.
He did one before, right? I think
he did do one before.
That one. Yeah,
about his production stuff and the ways that he takes out the rhythm in order to create flow in that. But we're hoping to have him come on and do something that's specifically on this album because it's so fascinating. I mean, at this conference, like I asked Ed May about it, because Ed May was around the program at the time. Like I'm just completely like fascinated by this album because the Starfire book is a novelization that makes you just go, what on earth were you thinking? Like, it's the novelization that like you do not write when you're in a classified program. You know, I mean, it's just like, what on earth was Ingo Swann thinking? And then to put out this album, which is this like utopian vision. And so one of the weird things about this album is that in the novel Starfire, he has these little snippets of lyrics from the main character, Daniel Merriweather, who's like this super psychic, right? And those snippets of lyrics appear on the album. So it is like this, you know, this album that's tied to the Starfire book that was going to be tied to a movie. But when you hear the album, like, I can't imagine from a producer standpoint or a director standpoint, like, I can't picture, even in the late 70s, how this album would then translate to a movie. You know, like, it just doesn't, if you know, it doesn't, there's disconnects. And the album itself is like really upbeat and like really like in your face kind of like positive vibes. And the novel's not like that at all. Like, the novel's actually like fairly like dark and like and disturbing, you know. So again, like, just the it's such a fascinating like moment in history that obviously no one's really delved into, because who cares? And that's why I think it's important to delve into it. Like Philip K. Dick said, you know, symbols of the divine appear in the trash stratum, right? So like, I think that this isn't, and not calling this, I love Stephen Halpern's music and stuff, so I don't mean that in a negative way, but most people, it's a cultural curiosity that, you know, they wouldn't look twice at. So
what's perceived as camp can really occult things.
Yeah, Stephanie Quick, actually, she said that, like, she was like, oh, well, I would listen to it, but I don't listen to novelty music. And I was like, whoa, Stephanie, let's take a step back here and like reconsider what we've just said, because this is not novelty music. Like, this is like a whole different thing. She meant it as a joke to poke me, because she knows that I'm obsessed with this album. But it made me think. I was like, you know, most people do look at this as a novelty album, and
yes.
I mean, it's weird. This is the like rock opera that came out of the psychic warfare program. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, that's weird.
And the movie could have been like a new age psychic Saturday Night Fever, pretty much.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's exactly like the kind of like feeling that like comes off this. Like, it would just been like, what, and at the same time, right? Like, this is what's sitting on top of a classified program. Like, that's crazy. This isn't like, what's the Scorpion song, Winds of Change, right? Like, which was written in the Cold War as sort of a psyop in Eastern Europe. Like, this isn't Winds of Change. You know what I mean? Like, there's no, like, unless you're into it, you're not going to be into it. And so like, just the idea that this is what like emerged from that, like, that's amazing to me. And there's other examples of it too. I mean, there's 30 Days to Mystical Experience, which was put out by one of the guys that was in the remote viewing program. And he did a whole series of books that were like these 30 days to, you know, X. And again, like, when you, even as like as a popular, you know, like, okay, this is going to be a psyop, but we're going to make this popular. Like, it doesn't even work like that, right? And so, and this is where I'm saying, like, this demythologizing this stuff, because like, when you actually look at the output, the cultural output, right? Like, it does not match up with the spooky story. You know what I mean? It just does not. And like, it doesn't match up, even if you want to say that they were trying to hide some nefarious thing behind this thing that doesn't look like it was nefarious. Star Children is not the album that you would put out, right? Like, that's not it. You know, like, get David Bowie or something. Yeah, it's not going to be Star Children. You know, so I mean, that, like,
I did want to mention, David, before we stop, that you're the Windbridge Institute Scholar and virtual residence now.
Yes, yeah, that was awesome. I was very honored to be brought into that. So it's an opportunity to get more in depth with the parapsychology at a serious level. Obviously, I've been covering it and publishing and co-authoring pieces with people. But this was, this is like an officiation, an initiation of my actual sort of moving into that at a higher level.
Congratulations, because you had been the editor-in-chief of their Threshold Journal of Interdisciplinary Consciousness Studies.
Correct. Yeah, that's through the Windbridge Research Center, which is an offshoot of the Windbridge Institute. And honestly, like it is such an honor because Mark is my friend, Mark Bacuzzi, who's one of the co-founders. Like I appreciate him as a friend, but honestly, like his work in parapsychology is just some of the coolest like stuff. Like he's a maker, in terms of like a hacker maker, right? Like making like these psi devices, building these tools, and he's just doing these really cool experiments, which is just, I'm always enjoy when Mark is like, I'm doing this thing because I know it's going to be like, it's just going to be cool. It's going to be amazing. I mean, his Throne of the Sphinx stuff where he's got like this like jacked up, like, set of random number generators, just like feeding into each other and then asking it questions and it gives you answers. He's got it hooked up to this chatbot thing and this, and he's building all this stuff himself to do these experiments. Windbridge, is one of the leading, if not the leading, groups that are looking into mediumship, which is one of the hardest things to test in parapsychology. People like the presentiment stuff that Dean Radin does, and that Daryl Bem did, as much kickback as that stuff gets, mediumship, like, that's way out there, and they're doing it in a rigorous, strict way, and really trying to like bring science to the question, which is incredibly hard because with mediumship, like the question immediately arises, is this precognition? Is this some sort of, clairvoyance or transmission of thought, that they're getting this information from? Are they pulling it from some conscious field, right? Like we don't even know, right? So, or is it actually a sign of someone who's died? So all of those things need to be, when you're experimental design, you need to take in all these things. And so they're absolutely brilliant. It's he and his wife, Julie Beischel, who won, she won one tier of the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies essay prizes. So Julie, a recognition of her work as being at the top of the field as well, that she won one of the Bigelow prizes. And so, to be the scholar in virtual residence for the Windbridge Institute, for me personally, is just, it's humbling and just amazing. Super excited for that. And able to, hopefully I can not embarrass the field and help to, bridge gaps.
We think you'll do fine, David. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, David. This has been awesome. We're going to continue this discussion a little bit more on Patreon for you guys, but we should say that this presentation is going to be available for our patrons, $10 and up, but also there will be a link to the Eventbrite page if you want to pay a one-time. That will be put onto this episode in the show notes. So guys, you take advantage of that if you just don't want to become a Patreon, which I don't know why you wouldn't, but because you do get a lot of extra stuff. But if you do not want to do that, that is available to join us on Friday night, March 25th for Our Children and Psychic Futures with David Metcalfe. And David, if you could tell everybody where they could find you and what's coming up next.
Yeah. So I will, coming up next is Star Children and Psychic Futures, which everyone should sign on for.
Absolutely, they should.
You can find me on Twitter at David B. Metcalfe, with an E on the end of it. That's where, if I publish something on these days, off, sort of infrequent times that I do, that appears on there, or, try to spark conversations in that. I honestly, I'm in a crash landing mode from this conference. So there's a lot of stuff sort of kicking around underneath. I'm just sort of trying to recenter myself and go forward. October of this year, I believe, is when we're going to have the UFO Outsider and folk art show at the Athens Clarke County Library. My friend Tex and I, Tex Crawford. So if anyone is in the Athens area and feels so inclined, I'll probably be posting more about that once I get solidified on dates and names and that kind of thing. But Tex Crawford is an awesome folk artist. He's a treasure to the Athens community, and he has a wide network of folk art and outsider art friends. So it should be an amazing show. I'm going to try to figure out how to present that in a way with photos and that, so people can see it online as well. But all of that is to be worked out. So those are the things that I will be doing. And also, the Windbridge thing, starting to work much closer with them right now to try to figure out, again, just this question of conversations in the public space. How do we do that? So find me on Twitter, and the links will flow from there.
Excellent. Thank you so much, David. This has been great. Guys, join us on the Patreon side. Come as well. All right. I think that's it for this episode. If you want to become a Patreon, Surfiel can tell you where to find that.
You can go to patreon.com/Conspirinormal, where you can become a Conspirinormalist and join the International Association of Conspirinormalists. For $5 and up, you get an extra episode every week, which will include this continuing conversation with David. For $10 and up, you get to join the Mystic Crew and are invited to attend all of these Strange Reality streaming events every month. And for $20 and up, you get to enter the ancient circle of strange realities, get some exclusive t-shirts and other goodies, as well as all the previously mentioned benefits. That is at patreon.com/Conspirinormal.
All right, guys. Remember Conspirinormal YouTube page. That's still up there. Go if you like the show. Give us a subscription on there. We'd really appreciate it. And I think that's it. Next week, we will be back. We're going to be talking about Shakespeare. So we'll talk to you next time on Conspirinormal.
If you would like to help the show, please consider becoming a Patreon at www.patreon.com/Conspirinormal, or leave a one-time donation at Conspirinormal.com. And please check out our YouTube channel, Conspirinormal Podcast.